So today we're going to be making a courgette and apple chutney. Now chutney is a preserve. Chutneys are very popular in England. We like to have them on something called a ploughman's, which is like cheddar, any type of cheese, pickled onions, bread, and vegetables and things like that. Chutneys also go fantastically with any type of cured meat or any type of cooked meat like such as ham and chicken. Chutneys are beautiful to have as part of a Christmas spread. So when you have your cheese board at Christmas or at the end of a meal, a chutney never goes amiss. I am a huge fan of making chutneys and preserves. So since my early 20s, I've been making chutneys, jams, jellies really regularly. And the reason why I got into it is in my early 20s I was at university. And even though I was working, I was sort of working hard and playing hard, and I found myself quite skint as a typical student. And you know, when there were Christmases or birthdays, I found that a really cheap but nice way of making gifts for people was to make homemade preserves, was to make homemade chutneys and jams. Because often my friends would just give me loads of fruit and veg because they were growing them and they had too much of it. Either that or fruit and veg is really cheap. And chutney is always a cheap thing to make because really you just need the fruit or veg that you're making it with, which I'm doing apples and courgettes today. So you need the fruit and veg, you need some form of vinegar, and vinegar is very cheap, and you need sugar. As long as you have those three things, anything else extra you add to it is what you choose to add as flavourings. So it's really easily adaptable as well. So you'll need a kilo of apples. These are apples I went out picking myself. I'll show you sort of my hand for size. They look like eating apples, but they're not. They're incredibly sharp, so they're like small cooking apples. So consider that if you're buying them from the shops, but I've picked them myself. These are courgettes. These are from my garden, actually. This is a massive one, actually. I've got a kilo of courgettes here. Now, I've spoken before about how passionate I am about seasonal eating. Eating when food is seasonal, and if you can get it locally, you know, local courgettes from my garden and apples from nearby, it just tastes better. It's cheaper and it tastes better. We're nearing the end of the courgette season now. I've had a plant, just one plant in my garden over the summer, and every week I've had 2 or 3 courgettes out of it. But I know it's the end of August now, which means it's ending the season of courgettes, really. I tend to know that my plant is ending its season because the courgettes start growing a bit funnily shaped, or they end up growing sort of, they don't grow fully. So my courgette plant will end soon, but with the seasons, my butternut squashes will be ready in 2 or 3 weeks, so that's nice. And just like how these sort of apples are very much still in season, end of August. Blackberries are kind of finishing now. I've been making lots of blackberry things over the end of summer, but wild plums such as sloes and damsons, which I can also make jam out of, are coming into season as well. So a kilo of cooking apples, which I'll peel and core in a minute. You'll need a kilo of courgettes. You'll need 1 red onion. You'll need a fair sized chunk of fresh root ginger. You will need 350 millilitres of cider vinegar. You can use red wine vinegar or white wine if you prefer. It's just that's what I have. I've got 50 millilitres of, it's a cloudy cider vinegar. It's something that I had left over. So 400 millilitres of vinegar in total. You'll need 350 grams of sugar. And you got your red onion, and I'm just going to add about half a teaspoon of allspice. I don't want to it's quite a strong flavour, allspice. I don't want to completely overpower the natural flavour from the ingredients, especially since we've got ginger there as well. But it's just going to add a nice little spice, sort of nice little flavour sort of profile to it. So as you can see, I really finely diced all of my ingredients. That took me ages, took me about half an hour, and I put them into what can only be described as a massive pan. It's a preserving pan. You can see it's got these useful measurements at the side, and it's just if you're going to regularly make jams and chutneys, I recommend investing in a preserving pan because you just need a really large pan for it. So I've got my courgettes, apples, onions, vinegar, and the allspice. I'm just going to add my sugar. Yeah, I know it looks like a lot of sugar, but unless you add sugar to a chutney, you end up the vinegar ends up too harsh. Just going to put my ginger, which I've finely chopped, and I'm just going to put a pinch of pepper and just a pinch of salt. And then what I need to do, I'm going to put that on full whack for 45 minutes. So that is a sort of guesstimation, a sort of guesstimate really, because so full whack for 45 minutes, stirring it every so often. When it comes to preserves, you know, jams, jellies, chutneys, it's about the setting point. So with chutneys, you don't want it too syrupy. If you cook it for too long and it gets too syrupy, your chutney becomes too hard. Alternatively, if you don't cook it enough, you end up with a vegetable vinegary soup rather than chutney. So I'm going to say 45 minutes, but once 45 minutes are up, I will show you when this is done what the consistency should look like so that you know when it's cooked. So after 45 minutes, I'll show you this is what it looks like. So it's reduced in volume, I don't know, at least about a third, I would say. You know, you can use the measurements on the side if you've got a preserving pan. I'll show you what the liquid content looks like. So it should be a slightly darker colour. If you want a slightly darker looking chutney, you can use, because I use white sugar, you can use brown sugar if you want a darker chutney, or you can use balsamic vinegar as well. Or if you want to make it sort of more of a red-y chutney, you can use tomato puree, tomatoes, chilli, that sort of thing. But this is sort of a pale chutney, this one. So if you can see, there is a certain amount of liquid there, but it's not syrup, but you can see, if I sort of get it to coat on the spoon, it is a glossy liquid. So not as thick as syrup, but you can see that there is sugar evident there as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to let that settle for 10 minutes. Made about 1.6 kilos of chutney, roughly, and I'm just going to put them into jars. Now this costs about £5. It is a sort of chutney funnel, and if you're going to do regular preserving, I would invest in one, because the cool thing about it is you use that and then you use a spoon. I've got a spoon ready. Oh, there we go. And what that does, I won't show you the whole process because it will take ages, but it means that you can spoon your chutney into the jars, your chutney or your jam or your jelly, and then it means that your chutney, and you can remove it. It means that when you're putting your jam and your chutney into the jars, particularly with ones with more narrower lids like that, it means that you don't get loads of stickiness, like loads of sticky horribleness around the edge of the jar, because you don't want that, because then when people pick up your lovely jar of homemade preserves, they get sticky hands and they just think, oh, they haven't cleaned the jar properly. So I would recommend in investing in one of them. So there we go. So I like to flatten it just because that's me. And then these are all sterilised jars or Tupperwares, which means they've been cleaned properly. And this is a jar I repurposed, so it used to have salsa in it, but I've cleaned it nicely and removed the label. And then when it comes to making it as a present for someone, I'll get a piece of fabric and an elastic band or some nice ribbon, and I'll tie that around the top so it hides the salsa lid, and it makes it look pretty in terms of presentation, in terms of making it look like a gift. But obviously if you're just going to eat it yourself, you don't need to make it look that pretty. But there we go. So that is apple and courgette chutney. Perfect with a nice chunk of mature cheddar.